Um, my name is Tara, and I'm the account manager here at Charity Digital, and it's a pleasure to be your host for today's webinar. So, welcome to everybody who has been able to join us. Whilst we're waiting for other people to join, please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box and let us know where you're joining us from today. So, firstly, I'll run through a quick intro to Charity Digital. We are a registered UK charity, and our mission is to help other charities to increase their impact by becoming more digital. And we do this through two main activities. So, the first of which is providing access to software products and hardware products that charities need at a dramatically reduced price. And the second way is through publishing content in the form of articles, podcasts, and videos, and running webinars like this one today and our other events that take place throughout the year to educate charity professionals and volunteers on how to make better use of digital tools and technologies. So, we are very proud to say that we've helped over 1 million charity professionals to learn about digital transformation and to improve their digital skills through our content website, our events, and our training programs, which have enabled over 77,000 charities to save in excess of £284 million on technology investments. So, today's session is sponsored by Dell, and we will be joined by Emma Stone, Zoe Amar, Rachel Caldicott, and Casper Kennedale. Discussing artificial intelligence and digital inclusion. So, as I'm sure you will know from when you signed up to join us today, the session will be sharing details of how AI is already impacting people and communities, the meanings of AI safety and AI literacy, and how charitable organisations can take action on digital and AI inclusion. So just before we get started, I'm going to quickly run through a few house rules and pointers for today's session. So the session is being recorded and will be uploaded to watch on demand within a week's time. The slides and other resources will be made available to you by the end of the day. So if you're joining us a little late or have to drop off, please don't worry. You won't be missing out on anything. Closed captions will be available for today's session. To enable these, please use at the bottom of the Zoom window, there's an up arrow, and next to this should be a button which says closed caption, and then you can click on show subtitles. So if anyone has any issues around accessing that, please do reach out via the chat, and we've got our lovely colleagues in the background who will be able to provide support. And during the webinar, please do ask lots of questions in the Q&A section for the panelists to address at the end of the initial discussion. So we will be able to go through those. And if there's a particular question that you see in the Q&A and you would like to see that upvoted so that we can prioritize answering that, then please do use the upvote feature, and we can ensure that those most in-demand questions are answered first. And finally, if you do encounter any sound or image issues, then please do let me know in the chat, and we'll do our very best to get the session back to normal as soon as we can. So without further ado, I think we can get started. So it would be great to begin, I think, with a round of introductions to today's panelists. So if it's okay, Emma, I will hand over to you to share a little more on yourself and where you're joining us from today.
Yeah, thanks ever so much. So I'm Emma Stone. I'm Director of Evidence and Engagement at Good Things Foundation, and we're the UK's leading digital inclusion charity. We run a national network, and it's brilliant just looking through the chat to see some familiar names there in terms of organisations that are already in the network. It's a really diverse network, libraries, community centres, and others, for some of whom digital inclusion is a really key big bit of what they do. And then for others, it might be a small amount, whether that's helping people with access, skills, confidence, or support. So really, really delighted to be here today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Emma. It's a pleasure to have you joining us. And yeah, really looking forward to hearing your perspectives. And next, perhaps we could go to Zoe.
Hi, hello. I'm Zoe. Run a digital consultancy working with charities. Zoe, I'm a digital. We focus on helping charities develop inclusive digital strategies. So I'm really excited to be here today. And AI and inclusion are a really big part of the Charity Digital Skills Report survey, which is out there at the moment. So we'll have some interesting data and insight to report back about that in the summer. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zoe. Again, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. I can hand over to Casper next.
Hi there. My name's Casper. I run Clear Community Web. We're based in South London. I guess we kind of work at the sharper end of digital inclusion, helping kind of residents, but also VTS and small groups to kind of build their skills and confidence in that area. We worked with over 1,000 individuals last year, so we're definitely sleeves rolled up and on the ground. So yeah, really excited to kind of take some time out and speak today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Casper, and great to have another fantastic organisation represented on the panel. And finally, I will hand over to you, Rachel.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Coldica. I'm Executive Director of Charitable. We do two things. On the one hand, we do consulting and policy work with governments and larger organisations to help them get their AI strategies working. And on the other, we do pilots and prototypes with communities to help them kind of make technology work for them in ways that are kind of constructive. We're all about community empowerment, putting that first. And I suppose I'm kind of at the other end of the scale to Casper, who's like super hands-on. We're more in the sort of the strategy end of things.
Okay, perfect. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Really looking forward to going ahead and getting into the discussion. So yeah, we can make a start. So our first question for the panel today is, in your work, how is AI already impacting upon people and communities? And I think that one would be great if Emma, you're happy to start us off.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tara. Um, so, so I suppose I've got a lot of different thoughts here, and some of them really come back to recognizing that um, AI AI has been around for a while, but there is something really significant that's happened over the last year where it does really feel as though there is a shift in the goalposts around what it means to be and feel digitally included. That comes with a little bit of concern around uh, does the kind of, does the really important focus on I detract from paying enough attention to thinking about fixing the digital divide? Recognizing that, we're talking about 10 million people who lack the basic digital skills and confidence, 2.5 million households not being able to afford home broadband. And these are really, really big questions and big problems. And I'm genuinely curious, and Good Things Foundation is really curious about how AI can be harnessed and can help to make using the internet easier. But I know we're also going to come on to talk later about issues around safety, around literacy, around also whose responsibility is it anyway in terms of ensuring that AI is inclusive and doesn't risk amplifying the inequalities we already see through digital exclusion and people facing digital barriers. And I think there is something that also, in terms of thinking about the impact of policy on people and communities, feels really important to underline. I am not confident that policymakers and those thinking about the design of products and the use of these products and how AI can be used in making decisions about allocation of resources, I'm not convinced that they fully grasp the lived reality of digital barriers and not having the skills and confidence, not having the access, and what that means in terms of digitally excluded people also being invisible from the data sets on which large language models are based, and therefore the risks also of bias coming into planning and policy decisions. So there's a lot there. It's more questions than answers. But what we're hearing from organisations, including organisations like Casper's and others when we've been speaking to community groups, is that actually AI also is generating fear. It's adding to some mistrust in terms of the uses of digital in people's lives, in terms of how they navigate that. People who might be scared already about using the internet. The kind of mainstream debate in AI does put an additional layer of fear and anxiety around that. So lots to think about there, and really look forward to other people's thoughts and also questions from the room on that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emma. That was a really insightful and thought-provoking start. So thanks so much. And yeah, it would be great to get some more perspectives. So Casper, I could hand over to you if that would be okay.
So I guess what's interesting from some of our observations of working with people specifically on the ground, I've been surprised actually at how common a subject AI has been beyond subjects that you've heard in the news. And I think that there is a danger of the, let's just say, the sci-fi element kind of taking over what could actually just be some practical tools that people use. And I think we have to also be careful with anything to do with technology that, let's have some time and an opportunity to explore the things that could be useful for us to help us do the things that we want to do. And for us to be able to choose what those bits are. So a good example that we kind of came across, and one that I've sort of mentioned a few times, was really around someone that had been faced with a lot of anxiety through a housing issue. Okay, and someone who's had a leak in their ceiling, and for many weeks has lost sleep, has had issues with the neighbours, and has time and time again tried to construct a letter of complaint to the landlord, and so on and so forth. By this point, debts have kind of come in, and the situation has gone on and gone on and gone on. This person can't use computers particularly well, not really sure where to begin, and so on. The cycle begins over and over again. This was our first introduction to ChatGPT, because this person kind of came into one of our sessions. He was like, I just really don't know where to start, because all I need to do is to get this complaint letter out of the way, and I'm just stuck in this rut. So we thought, actually, do you know what? Let's just see what this thing's all about. And what we found is quite quickly, just constructing that letter of complaint for someone, a template in a way that they could understand, but in a way that they could see where they could amend it, just felt actually was the quick win. But for me, the quick win wasn't about technology. It was about actually this person had been able to do this 2 weeks before. He'd have had 2 weeks more sleep than he had at that point in time, and his kind of mental health, etc., would have been a lot better. So for me, with technology, it is really about understanding and giving yourself and being able to explore and try things, and ideally outside of the critical point. And I think that with AI, if we can start introducing things in particular ways where things are useful and practical, rather than at a point of conflict, then by default, our kind of skills will develop, and that we can also show someone else, help other people. And that for me is the way technology or things that help us do the things that we want to do better gets adopted.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Casper. And yeah, in terms of that viewpoint of how AI is impacting people and communities, it's really valuable to have that real life example. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And Zoe, I don't know if you had any thoughts to share with us on that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've heard so far, I very much agree with. And I like Emma's point about some of the people who this is going to be impacted the most by are the ones that we're not going to be hearing about. So the chances are that if you were digitally excluded before, as these tools develop, you could become even more digitally excluded. And I think this speaks to a point that often comes up in AI about the unintended consequences of adoption. So to give you a really specific, tangible example, which I think speaks to a lot of issues about inclusion, is we have heard from a few charities that some of them are considering how they might use some of AI tools in order to see who might be using AI, or they assume would be using AI as part of job application. And I think those tools are quite notorious for the fact that sometimes they actually flag applicants who not actually use AI but have English as a second language. So I think that's a really good example of where there is potentially a huge unintended consequence for someone's life and their career prospects, which could ultimately have a really bad impact on people from marginalised groups. And that's where we need to think about how we adopt these tools holistically and consider what the consequences and risks are across all the different areas of what charities do.
Excellent. Thank you, Zoe. Yes, thank you so much for sharing another great example. That's, yeah, really, really great to hear. I know we just had a request come through in the chat to please mute unless speaking. So I don't know if there was a little bit of sound interference. Apologies if so, but I can see that everyone is now muted. So thanks to everybody. And yeah, that's brilliant. And to wrap up on this question before we move on, Rachel, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, so I suppose our work looks at people at a slightly larger scale. So one of the things we're interested in is how might the use of technology ladder up to bigger impacts and bigger outcomes for people. And I think one of the things that we see is that AI is really something that is used to do things faster, basically. So if you have a thing that is quite laborious, could be difficult to do, it's great to automate parts of it to make it happen faster. However, we definitely see that that means that people who are excluded faster. People who are more likely to not have a voice, as has been said, to lack power. People actually for whom English isn't their first language are not represented in data sets, And so this means that when we're looking at the decisions that are made about people and things and services that are driven by AI, the outcomes could be really negative for exactly the people we're all working to look after. And so I think there's like a few different things to be thinking about. And one of those is that very often, like thinking about at the moment, we've got police vans that are using facial recognition technologies, right? So how they're working is they are parking up in streets and at large events, and they have cameras that spot people who are walking past who might be on a watch list. Now, what's happening is that people who have a positive match on the watch list are instantly arrested, even though we know that there is a 1 in 10 likelihood of false positives, which goes up massively, particularly with women and people with darker skin. It is an inherently racist technology, right? And this is being rolled out at a cost of, I think, 52 million by the government at the moment. There's been no public consultation about it and no recourse. And so the things that I'm concerned about are equally, what are the new kinds of inequalities that are being introduced into society by use of AI that we're not looking at because we kind of have our heads down in GPT.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rachel. Again, really valuable perspective there, and a great example of how this is impacting on a day-to-day in our communities. And staying with you, Rachel, and quite relevant, I think, to the point you've just made, our next question is looking at what does AI safety mean to you at your organization? So I don't know if there's anything building upon what you've just spoken about there that you could also share with us on that point.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I suppose the thing that we like to think about is, I think sometimes one of the things that happens with AI is we've got 5 or 6 enormous technology companies who get to shape the narrative, right? So we get moments like the Prime Minister interviewing Elon Musk and asking him for his vision, right? But we don't all get the opportunity to share in the same way, right? And so I don't know if people here will have heard, there are a group of people who are very concerned about existential risk, about the fact that AI might end the world. That, I think, by all accounts, seems fairly unlikely and is more probably something that some of those larger companies are saying in order to change the regulatory environment and the conversation that happens there. And I think the things that we are most interested in are the ways that AI is often in hidden and unseen ways harming individuals and communities who are disempowered already. So one of the things that we're interested in is rather than taking a safety first approach, which would be like saying maybe let's climb to the top of a mountain and put rails around the edge so that no one falls off. We're more interested in helping people make better strategies and choosing when it's right to automate and when it isn't, right? And so I think our perspective is not that AI is amazing or awful. It's that it can be used sometimes in ways that lead to better outcomes and sometimes not. And I think just the other thing I would say is that like in 2024, it feels like really important to talk about and acknowledge the environmental impacts of AI. And that even though it might seem very, very remote, right? If you're typing into the chat bot, right, that might seem just like a kind of ordinary thing to do on the internet, right? But actually, the amount of compute, the amount of hardware, the amount of electricity that particularly Google and Microsoft are calling on is really problematic. And that I think if we're thinking about how to use AI in ways that align with our values in ways that lead to better outcomes for everyone we're interested in supporting. I think it's also really important to think about those environmental impacts as well.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Rachel. Really, really interesting points raised again there. So thank you so much for sharing those with us. And yeah, I think perhaps Emma, would you like to share your thoughts on what AI safety means to you at Good Things Foundation?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say I always really love listening to Rachel because I think she just does really helpfully and accessibly paint a big picture. And it's interesting, I was looking at one of the questions from the chat, which is around the best and the worst of AI. And I really agree with Rachel, actually, that it kind of isn't a best and worst. We can see both. And actually, a lot of what we're talking about is around the balance, is around the trade-offs, is around what needs to be in place in order to get the best, to get the benefits, to get those good outcomes for people. And it's the same in terms of thinking about safety as well. Just a little bit of a sideways step. A project that we've been involved as Good Things Foundation in recently has been trying to create a national benchmark for what it means to feel digitally included as a household, starting with households with children. It's called the Minimum Digital Living Standard, and I'll share a link later on. But I just wanted to mention that because issues around digital safety and needing to have the skills to understand and manage digital risk come up in the kind of the basket of things that you need as a household to be able to engage with opportunities safely and confidently, as well as then thinking about the devices, the connectivity, and the more practical and functional skills. And there's something for me in this, which is about recognizing what we all need, no matter what age we are, and a question mark about how we supported to understand and access that and build those skills, build that understanding, whether that's through schools or community centres. There's a lifelong learning bit that I think feels really important here. But at the same time, what a lot of the families and the members of the public involved in the research were also really strongly saying is, actually, this is also a shared responsibility. And we need government, and we need the tech companies, and we need anyone using, and including, if voluntary sector organisations are harnessing AI, it's your responsibility too about, you know, how you're going to use that to be more inclusive, to deliver those better outcomes. But I think it is that point about safety and well-being being a shared responsibility, and as not, as all too often happens, defaulting to the heaviest weight of that falling on individuals and families themselves, and then on community organisations and libraries and others to whom they might turn for support.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Emma. Really, really interesting. And again, thank you for tying in that question that came through in the Q&A, and keeping your answer aligned with that is really great to have the audience engaged. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to mention the Q&A. So I know that's just also been sent through by my colleague in the chat, but just as a reminder, if you do have any further questions for the panel to address at the end of the discussion, it would be great if you could please use the Q&A section rather than just the main chat, so that we can ensure that they are not lost and do get answered for you. So yeah, thank you again so much, Emma. And Zoe, I don't know if you had anything to share with us from your perspective on AI safety and what that means to you at your organisation.
So one of the safest things I think any charity can do is to get their learning about AI out in the open. And I think one of the things that I'm seeing happen very organically across the sector, which is both an exciting thing, but also potentially a bit of a risk, is that AI, very differently to other change programs, instead of coming in from the top, is really coming in from the grassroots. And whilst I think it's really exciting to see junior and manager level staff experimenting and innovating, we need to make sure that senior people really understand what's going on, and they're also providing the right support and training and capacity building, and guidance as well as about what staff can and can't do. So I think that's one of the first things that organisations need to get right, to talk about what they're doing, talk about what they're learning, so they can begin to prioritise what they're going to use these tools for, what they're not going to use these tools for, and just get all of these learnings out in the open. And in terms of how we make this inclusive, just looking at the internal perspective for a moment, one of the things that I'd love to see more charities talking about is how adopting AI is very much a test of your culture. I'm finding that the charities where cultures are very open, where people are keen on learning and collaborating, where there's less blame, it's more about transparency and trust, are adopting AI more thoughtfully and responsibly and safely, because those processes of communication, just that's the way we do things around here, are much clearer. But if you have more of a top-down culture, then I think it's a little bit harder, and that's where your senior leadership team will be even more important in providing that guidance and support in helping everyone adopt AI safely.
Thank you so much, Zoe. That's a really, really interesting point in terms of visibility across the whole of the org. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And Casper, to wrap up on that question, I will come to you for your thoughts on AI safety and what that means to you at your org.
Well, I guess it was just following a little bit on Zoe's point, and I think it'd be nice to get to a point where some of the usage of tools within the workplace becomes normalized to the extent that it does become a tool, and we can be kind of open about what's being used. So I think there's a fear from some of the groups and organizations that I've worked with that, as you say, someone over there started to use X, Y, and Z, and now they're doing all of our social media posts, and all of a sudden we feel we've lost control of our tone of voice or whatever. An example. But I think if we kind of acknowledge that maybe it's not about things being replaced, and by being able to share how we're using it, and also using this as a leverage point to kind of ignite some interest back into digital stuff in the workplace. I mean, what we found is organizations who there's lots of people who are working within offices are digitally overwhelmed with the internet. They just feel, do you know what? I just can't do this stuff. I never have. I'm never going to. But all of a sudden, at the moment, the narrative around AI has piqued a bit of interest from people that, weren't or aren't. And I think there is an opportunity here that we can harness that to help people re-get that enthusiasm. The risk and the safety risk here is actually that if we don't engage in this, and this becomes, back to the big picture, big tech companies dominating everything, etc., and we don't participate and lobby and use this for ourselves, then we do become sleepers. And the risk is that it will kind of pass us by, and actually more people could be excluded. But the sad thing about that is you won't know we're excluded because the AI bit has already done their thing. So that's the safety risk for us, is that, or that we can, should, and need to be involved, and we're advocates.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Casper. That's a really great point to wrap up that question on. And again, staying with you, it would be great to hear your perspective on AI literacy and what that means for you and your organization. And sorry, Casper, just before we get started, I just wanted to give everyone a heads up that we have around 10 minutes until we will move on to the Q&A section with the audience. So we'll just keep that in mind. And continue. Thank you so much.
I guess AI literacy for me, and as an organization, is really about understanding what it actually is. And I think that there's a lot of misconception about what AI is and what it can do. I think understanding that on the ground is important. Understanding how you want to use it as an organization. Start thinking about kind of, your guidelines, whether it's content guidelines, whether it's a proportion of stuff that can be generated by AI versus not, whether it's starting to think about checks and balances so that you can use tools, you can be open about using tools, but you can also not still be in control of your output. And I think that they're kind of things that are kind of a structural level. At a kind of hands-on level, if you like, what we've found is being very open about using AI with staff with challenges, particularly around things like dyslexia, ADHD. We found that being able to use some of the tools to kind of help, and at that point has allowed us to it's allowed those people that have challenges to kind of feel actually more participatory, and we've had particular successes with the government's Access to Work scheme in getting kind of AI related tools as part of an assessment for an employee. So I think that's been useful, and whether that's literacy, whether that's inclusion, it's kind of both. But I think we could only have that by having an open mind about how we could use it, and not being afraid of it, but also making sure that we within our environment can keep things in a box, and not keep it in a box, but can to know where it is, be able to see it from all sides and not be overwhelmed by it.
Thanks so much, Casper. That's really, really great. And Rachel, I'll come to you next. It would be great to have your perspective on what AI literacy means to you.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things that happens in the modern world is we're all asked to be literate about a lot of things. We're asked to be literate about data, statistics, digital, AI. And I think to Emma's point earlier, there's a lot that gets pushed onto us as individuals, that actually there ought to be others who have responsibility to make things more understandable. And so I think one of the issues at the moment is globally, I think this year 2 billion people will vote all over the world this year. And we're in we're in an interesting moment in terms of AI generated content, and who knows who to trust what, right? And I think, the greatest example of that was probably everything that happened around Kate Middleton, and and the photos that were put out by the palace and those things. And that actually, I think, rather than asking everybody to understand everything, we're sort of in a place at the moment where what we need to do is ask people to keep an open mind, not feel as if they're missing out, if they're not heading headlong into AI, and to also remember that there are, other means of checking on information. We can, we don't always have to believe everything we see on the internet. And so I think it's a difficult term. There's a lot of things happening in there. But I think what I would really like to see is things like like um, explainability to be built into AI, so that if anybody wants to know or understand, it's easier to do that.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Rachel. Once again, really, really interesting. And yeah, Emma, I'll come to you next. Be great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'm going to do a little bit of a link into one of the questions. So it's a question from Luke Oakes around teaching learning skills in the community and what actions need to be taken in relation to information media literacy. It's a great question, because I do think, I'm really curious. AI might be able to help, but actually it will also generate and make it easier to spread fake news, as well as maybe check on it. But I think the link that I wanted to make is there's something for me, and I know Luke comes from a library, and libraries have a really key role in terms of information literacy, and also in terms of digital literacy and inclusion, and actually just literacy full stop. Because a lot of the time when we're talking about digital inclusion, for many people, it will be first and foremost an access barrier, and it'll be about poverty. But there are also a lot of people for whom it might be low literacy, low numeracy. As Rachel's already talked about English not being a first language. And if you're navigating the internet in the UK, that's really important. So there are lots of different areas of literacy here. And completely agreeing, with Rachel, without wanting all of that burden to be on people, I do really think there is something about how can we avoid setting up lots of different silos of this is digital literacy, this is media literacy, this is AI literacy, this is personal data literacy, health literacy. All of these now, financial literacy, I feel like I could go on and on. And all of these have different areas of expertise and really important tools, but we need to think about all of these in the context of the world we are living in now, rather than how it has been in the past. So I think that's a bit of a plug to kind of use this as an opportunity to rethink what supporting people through their lives so that they have the literacy and understandings they need, what that means. Now, one of the things that we do as Good Things Foundation is we do provide basic digital skills learning content. We've got a platform called Learn My Way that's designed to, I suppose, support community centres, libraries and others who are providing support with people with a tool that they can use in a community setting, in a library, etc. So we're actively thinking now about what needs to be different about that, what new content do we need to share that could be really relatable for people who might have lower digital skills and confidence about AI. So watch this space. We're hoping to kind of launch a first short explainer video in May. And really importantly, that will be a first, because what we then want to do is understand, has that been useful? Who has it been helpful? And really kind of think about what else might be useful in future.
Amazing. Thank you, Emma. That's excellent. And thanks so much for addressing Luke's question. And likewise to Luke, thank you so much for sharing with us. It's amazing to see great questions coming through in the Q&A and seeing how engaged everybody is. So I do hope that you're finding the content useful so far. And to wrap up on the topic of AI literacy, Zoe, I'll come to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I really agree with what I am hearing so far. And I think this takes us back ultimately to how we can be more literate, but also adopt these tools in a way that's more inclusive overall, because there's no point being literate without being inclusive as well. And in fact, I'd say that having an understanding of how these tools will impact different groups, as Rachel was saying and Emma was saying, is actually part of the skill set of how you adopt these tools responsibly and successfully. So on that note, I think what I'd recommend is, obviously, as we were saying earlier, understanding these different ways in which the tools can be used, but also the consequences of that, the unintended consequences we spoke to. But another issue which I think is really important is whether AI really needs to be an option at all. And I don't mean wholesale, won't use it. I mean, there'll be some circumstances when actually you want to be offering people, especially those who are digitally excluded, non-digital options, because that's ultimately the thing that's going to help them stay engaged and not fall through the cracks. And I had a example of this the other day when I was talking to a friend who spends a lot of time volunteering for a local food bank, which is really busy at the moment, as you can imagine. And we were talking about some of the challenges she's facing on things like resource allocation. And I was sort of thinking, as she was discussing these problems, is there a way that AI could help here? And actually, what it just came down to was that they really needed a decent, simple database that did what it said on the tin before going anywhere near thinking about AI. So whilst I'm as excited about these tools as anyone, I think part of the literacy to avoid the risk of the silos that everyone's explained really brilliantly is also to think about, when is it appropriate to use these tools and not to use these tools, and how are we going to assess the risks and evaluate what we need to consider in order to make the right decisions in the right way.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you so much. And I think you've already touched upon it with your last answer, but our next question was around how charities can make AI more inclusive. So Zoe, I can stay with you to share more thoughts with us on that. And just to remind everyone, it would be great to start the Q&A from the audience in around 5 minutes time. So we'll just be mindful of that with the next few answers. And then, yeah, but over to you again, Zoe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. And I'll keep this brief. I know time's of the essence. So the only other things I would add to what I was saying earlier is in order to make the way you adopt these tools really inclusive, is that I think once you start to understand what the potential unintended consequences are, I'd say good practice in whatever you're trying to do inclusively, whether that's online or offline, is to understand some of the specific challenges that you're dealing with. So maybe the impact on the marginalised groups that we talked about, also what the impact will be on things like goals and accountabilities. So I think that is one of the key things to consider as we adopt this further, or not adopt it as the case may be. What are the sort of specific issues that may then arise around inclusion, such as excluding certain groups? And then how can we make sure we're not doing that? Who's got the accountability for making sure that happens? And that's where I think it comes back to that very gradual organic adoption that I talked about earlier, and where that can be a bit of a risk in itself, and why it's so important to get the learning out in the open, so you really understand the specific ways in which these tools could potentially impact different marginalised groups, because that's going to be different all of those groups as well.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Zoe. And yeah, I will come to you next, Rachel, if that's okay.
Yes, of course. And so actually, just as a follow on from Zoe, I co-authored a tool a couple of years ago that helps teams map out the unintended consequence of the decisions they're making in products. And I can share a link to that in the chat. And I think one of the things I would say, I would just completely agree. I have a slide that says FOMO is not a strategy, right? And so it can feel at the moment like everyone is just saying more AI, and it's very often where the money is, and it might be much harder to get funding to do a much more straightforward, easy thing. But it might be that that is the answer you need now. And I, can like absolutely agree with everything that's been said here.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Again, really, really interesting, and yeah, to sort of cover on this last question, Emma, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, so not much more to add. I love FOMO is not a strategy. I think that's a great response actually to some of the questions that are coming up around, are people adopting AI for the sense of adopting it? It's something we're, as a charity ourselves, we're trying to work out, but very much guarding against going, how do we use AI? It's more, what are the problems we're trying to challenge? Is there anything that AI could help us with? But that key bit in between of thinking about what's the quality of the data, and almost investing more in the quality of the data that we collect and have, because if we don't get that right, then AI is just going to be helping us, make bad decisions, just make them faster, as Rachel was saying earlier as well. And I love hearing from Zoe about kind of just really channeling that into thinking about inclusion as well as responsibility and approaches from the outset. I think there's also something here about how as voluntary sector organisations and charities, we can benefit from some of the learning and investment that others are making in this space, others who have bigger budgets to be able to work some of this out, and to be able to kind of learn from them and their experiences rather than rushing into this. I do think it is one of, I do feel really, really anxious about the prospect of, commercial and especially public sector organisations ending up investing a lot of time and money unwisely in using AI tools as part of their broader digital transformation. There have been some really, really awful examples of that. So I do think there's something that we all need to really guard against.
Sure. Thank you so much, Emma. That's really, really helpful and really interesting. And just to wrap up before we move on to the Q&A, Caspar, I will come to you. Really sorry that we are a little bit time limited, but we'd still love your perspective on how charities can make AI more inclusive.
I mean, I just got a really small point that just follows and echoes everything that's been said, and I'm not sure whether it's in inclusion or whether it's safety, whether it's a watch point, but fundamentally, if the money is coming from a couple of companies you can fit onto one hand, that by definition isn't inclusive, and the if development is focused on that motivation to solve stuff to make things more effective, more efficient, then it's for who? Is this where we want money to be spent on? And at a different talk that I was on, there was a correlation between money being spent to optimize via AI the NHS as opposed to investing into doctors. So we've got to be mindful about exactly what we're trying to do here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Caspar. And yeah, thank you to everybody. It's been really interesting to have that initial discussion section and hear everybody's really valuable thoughts and insights around this really important topic. So yeah, we'll move on to the Q&A. And again, great to see such an engaged audience. I just wanted to mention that we will be sharing follow-up slides and resources. And if we don't get around to answering your question today, please do feel free to reach out via email, and we can ensure, as long as we have your permission to sort of pass on your email address and details, we can connect you with the speakers and panelists from today to ensure that we get those answers over to you. So yeah, we could start off with a question from Lynn Roberts, which is on whether there are any positives in legislation around AI. Are any countries/international bodies getting it right, or at least on the right road? So I don't know if anybody has anything to share on positive examples that we could learn from. Sure, Rachel, please go ahead.
So I don't know, I know we don't have long, but I would say I think the best thing I've seen published by an international government is there's a White House document called, I think it's towards a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, which was published in 2022. And that outlines what a rights-based approach to legislating looks like. In the UK, we are tending to go down a risk-based approach, which like both risk-based and technical auditing, which is less likely to lead to good outcomes in the medium term. Don't really have time to go into all the ins and outs of that, but I would really recommend this document, which I don't know if I can't work out how to share links with everyone, but I can drop a link to that in the chat, and hopefully it can be shared on.
Sure, thank you so much, Rachel. And yeah, we can absolutely include that in the resources that are sent out via email after, so we can ensure that that link does reach the audience. And yeah, next we will go to a question from Pauline on could Zoe give us any early information on the Charity Digital Skills Report and what it's saying about the use of AI in charities?
Thanks, Pauline. Great question. So we will have all of the data on that ready for the launch of the report in July. And obviously the survey is still open now and it's running till the 26th of April. So for anyone who hasn't got involved in it, we'd love to hear your views on charities and adoption of AI. So please get involved in that. So that's why I can't share any data with you right now. But what we do have coming up over the next day also is we will be sharing a few initial findings about AI, very much with the caveat that this is all a work in progress and will change by the time that the survey closes on 26th of April. So there's a few sort of little teaser stats I can share with you over the next couple of days, but all of them, keep your eyes posted for when we launch the report in July. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Zoe. And thanks again to Pauline. And I've got another question from Phil from the audience. And Phil says, I'm from the charity sector and wondered how we can use AI and digital inclusion to help with funding and reaching more people for donations. I think that's a new perspective. So, yeah, I'm not sure if anybody has thoughts that they'd be happy to share on that one.
I think it's a really interesting question, although I'd separate out the using AI to help with funding and reaching more people for donations, because that sounds as though, that fits in with thinking about AI in terms of marketing and engagement tools. But I'm linking it also to Rebecca's question, which is also around, for those that are grant funders, anticipating people submitting applications, having used AI to support them, which is the equivalent of people using AI to submit job applications, right? And it's one of those kind of examples of where people will be doing this. They're doing this already. And so, you've got organizations like Casper's that know that and get that and kind of realize that actually they're going to need to equip people who are seeking work to be able to think about how some of those tools can help them. The thing that I'm more worried about is actually the other side of it, which is how AI is used to make decisions about kind of people who are applying for jobs, or Rebecca, thinking about your community foundation. Are you anticipating using AI to sift you and filtering the applications that you receive? Is that the sort of thing that a big funder like National Lottery Community Fund, for example, would be looking at? And how do we make sure that process is fair? So I suppose it's not a here is what I would be saying to you, but it's more kind of, I think these are both questions from Phil and Rebecca that raise bigger issues. And it's not only about what comes into us as charities, as funders, it's also about how we then use those tools to make decisions, or make decisions about who we're targeting for donations or giving grants to.
Thank you so much, Emma. Really, really great response to wrap us up. And yeah, I am afraid that is all we have time for today, because we're nearly at 2 o'clock. So thank you once again to Emma and Zoe and Rachel and Casper for joining us today. It's been so interesting and helpful, and great again to see the audience so engaged. And once again, I just wanted to remind everybody that the session is being recorded, or has been recorded, and will be uploaded to watch on demand via YouTube in a week's time. The slides and other resources will also be made available to you over the coming days. So again, if you've missed anything, then please do not worry. And we'd be most grateful if you are able to share your feedback with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And we've pasted a link for the feedback survey in the chat, and you should also receive a prompt after leaving this page. So yeah, thank you so much to everybody who joined us, and I wish you a lovely rest of your day.